At my graduation dinner, I watched my mom slip something into my glass. I smiled, stood up, and handed it to my golden child brother. He drank every drop. What happened next destroyed their empire. Hey Reddit, my parents tried to poison me at my own graduation dinner, so I gave the glass to my golden child brother instead. He drank it. Then I burned their entire pharmaceutical empire to the ground. Buckle up because this one's a ride. I'm Nate, 23 male, and I just graduated with a degree in environmental science from the University of Texas at Austin. Should have been the best day of my life. 4 years of grinding through lab work, field research, and professors who thought sleep was optional. I had finally proven I was worth something. My parents even rented out the entire rooftop of the Four Seasons downtown to celebrate. City lights glittering below us. Live jazz band. Food that probably cost more than my car. Everything looked perfect from the outside. But here's the thing about my family. Nothing is ever what it looks like. See, just 2 weeks before that party, my parents had called me useless, said my degree was worthless, said I'd never bring honor to the family name. And now suddenly they're throwing me this massive celebration? Something wasn't adding up. Then, right in the middle of all that celebration and congratulations, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. When the server placed a glass in front of me, I caught my mother's hand move, quick, almost invisible. Her diamond ring caught the light as she tilted her fingers over my drink. A fine white powder dissolved into the liquid before anyone else could notice. I didn't flinch, didn't react, just picked up that glass with a smile, turned to my brother Caleb, who was sitting next to me, basking in his usual spotlight, and said the words that would change everything. You deserve this more than me, brother. And Caleb, golden child that he is, took it without a second thought and drank every last drop. That night, under those sparkling Austin lights, I finally understood the truth. My own parents were trying to kill me, and I was about to make them regret ever thinking I was the weak one. Before I get into what happened next, you need to understand how deep this dysfunction goes. My family isn't just toxic. They're a whole hazmat situation. My father, William Porter, is the CEO of Porter Pharmaceuticals, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in Texas. The kind of guy who gets his face on business magazines and speaks at fancy conferences about innovation and corporate responsibility. Complete fraud, obviously. Behind closed doors, he's cold, calculating, and views everything through the lens of profit. To him, my brother and I weren't sons. We were investments, assets to be managed. My mother, Diana, comes from old money. Her family has been in medicine for generations. She was raised to believe that reputation and status matter more than anything else. The kind of woman who spends more on a single charity gala dress than most families spend on groceries in a year. Every public appearance is curated to perfection. Every smile is calculated. And then there's Caleb, my younger brother, 20 years old and already being groomed to take over the company, junior at Harvard studying business. Dean's List every semester, fast-tracked to a management position the second he graduated. At every party and every photo shoot, my mother introduced him as the rightful heir to the Porter legacy. Me? I was just Nate, the older son who chose the wrong path, the disappointment who studied environmental science instead of business, the one who would never amount to anything in their eyes. The favoritism started early. I still remember being in middle school, coming home with a silver medal from a cross-country competition. I was so excited. Burst through the door expecting hugs and congratulations. Instead, I found my parents throwing a mini celebration because Caleb had been selected to perform piano at some community event. Dad glanced at my medal for maybe half a second before saying something I'll never forget. That's nice, but running won't help your career, son. Mom didn't even look up from the outfit she was picking out for Caleb. That's when I learned the rules of my family. Recognition wasn't something I could earn. It was reserved for Caleb. Always. High school made it worse. Caleb was the star of everything. Debate team captain, tennis champion, straight A student. Every achievement got celebrated with parties and photos and local newspaper articles. The walls of our house were covered with his trophies and honors. Me? I got straight A's too. Won science awards. Got accepted to every college I applied to. But my achievements went into a drawer somewhere. Out of sight. Out of mind. The one time my mother actually showed up to something of mine was sophomore year when I won first place in the state science fair for my research on antibiotic contamination in local water sources. I was nervous waiting for her reaction, desperate for just one moment of approval. But when they handed me the award and snapped photos, she leaned close and whispered in my ear, "You look so sloppy, like you don't belong here." That killed whatever joy I had. Right there on stage, my parents never asked what I wanted to do with my life. They had already decided. Nate would study pharmaceuticals. Nate would join the company. Nate would work as a researcher to support his brother's leadership. Every other dream was nonsense. When I told them I loved environmental science and wanted to study the effects of industrial pollution on ecosystems, my father dismissed it with a wave of his hand, said that was just for people who write useless reports, said I needed to do real work to contribute to the family. When I got accepted to UT Austin for environmental studies, he threatened to cut off all financial support. It was only thanks to scholarships and student loans that I managed to hold my ground. I spent most of my life thinking I was born just to be Caleb's backdrop. He stepped onto the stage bathed in bright lights, while I stood in the shadows waiting for a glance of recognition that never came. Called stubborn, called ungrateful. While Caleb just had to smile to receive everything. That feeling etched itself so deep that I genuinely believed I was nothing more than a shadow, an unnecessary piece in the Porter family puzzle. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the only light in those dark years. Ironically, she was my father's mother, former chemist who had been one of the most brilliant researchers in Texas back in her day. Won major research awards. Her work laid the foundation for developing new pharmaceutical compounds. In fact, her early discoveries were what allowed Porter Pharmaceuticals to launch in the first place. But here's the thing that still makes my blood boil. In every company history book and every glossy brochure, her name was nowhere to be found. They erased her completely. I remember once when I was 15, she took me down to the basement of her old house and opened a dusty wooden trunk. Inside were stacks of research notes written in her elegant handwriting. She told me those formulas had led to the very first pain relief drug that my father's company used to launch itself. They took my work, she said with this sad smile. Then they erased my name from every certificate, every photograph. Because I was a woman. Back then, people didn't believe women could stand equal to men in the lab. I asked her if she regretted it. Her eyes lit up with this fierce spark. Never. Because science isn't about glory. It's about serving people. But I do regret letting others decide my worth. Grandma Eleanor was nothing like my parents. If my father saw everything through profit and power, she looked at people, at future generations. She always told me to never let anyone say my passion was meaningless. If I loved the environment, follow it. If I wanted to fight, then fight. Don't become anyone's shadow, not even the shadow of this family. Those words became my compass. What my parents didn't know until it was too late was that Grandma had prepared a secret gift for me. When I was little, she often told me that one day I would be free, that I would have the strength to never depend on anyone. I thought it was just her way of comforting me, but she had quietly established a trust fund worth $8 million in my name alone. The conditions were clear. The money would only be released once I graduated from college or turned 25, whichever came first. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was the key to my escape. I learned about it when I was 16. Shortly before she passed away, she called me into her room, held my hand tightly, her eyes clouded by illness, but still glowing with pride. "Nate," she said, "I won't let you spend your life trapped in this cycle of injustice. Promise me, no matter what happens, you'll follow the path you choose. Don't let anyone buy you off or force you into submission." I didn't fully understand at the time, but I nodded. A few months later, she was gone, left me with this hollow ache that never really went away. My parents knew nothing about the trust until 3 months before graduation. During a company meeting about family finances and assets, the firm's longtime attorney accidentally mentioned a special account managed by an independent group of trustees. He assumed my parents already knew. I watched my father's face drain of color, watched my mother's eyes harden into a cold glare. From that moment, everything changed. The way they looked at me was completely different. It was no longer just contempt or dismissal. It was quiet hostility. They understood that if I received that inheritance, I would be completely independent. I wouldn't need the company. I wouldn't need the prestigious Porter family, and I might even have the power to stand against them. I had become a real threat, but that wasn't all. Combined with what I was about to discover about their company's illegal activities, I had become someone they needed to eliminate. I discovered the company's illegal toxic dumping during my final semester when I joined a field research project run by the Environmental Science Department. The study site was along the Colorado River, a waterway cutting through multiple industrial zones, long documented as being at risk of contamination. I chose the project not just out of scientific passion, but because I had this unshakable feeling that something was waiting to be uncovered. At first, the work was routine, collecting water and sediment samples, measuring pH levels and dissolved oxygen, checking for heavy metals. But right from the earliest tests, I noticed alarming irregularities. Mercury and lead levels were far higher than EPA safety standards. The deeper we dug, the more disturbing the results became. We started detecting traces of pharmaceutical compounds, synthetic molecules I recognized immediately from reading industry journals. These substances only show up in untreated wastewater from drug manufacturing plants. When I reported my findings to my supervising professor, He nodded thoughtfully, said they'd suspected this for a long time, but no one had ever had enough scientific data to prove it conclusively. That's when the thought hit me. Could it be that my own father's company was the culprit? I quietly devoted more time to comparing samples from different sections of the river. The current led me closer to an industrial complex, marked with a sign that made my heart stop. West Facility. Porter Pharmaceuticals. Everything I was uncovering pointed straight back at my own family. I searched through the facility's public reports on wastewater treatment. The documents were filled with numbers that looked perfect, so flawless they were unbelievable. From my internship experience, I knew no process ever ran that smoothly. Something was being hidden. I secretly took photos, stored sample data, recorded everything in a private notebook. Day by day, the evidence mounted. In samples collected just outside the plant's gates, I detected dangerously high concentrations of an experimental compound not yet included in standard testing lists. It was the same drug I had read about in the company's internal research documents. There was no way it appeared there by accident. It could only have come from Porter Pharmaceuticals. I felt my stomach twist into knots. On one hand, I was a scientist driven by truth. On the other, this was my family, my parents' company, the place where Caleb was being groomed to lead. If I went public, it would be like turning a weapon on my own bloodline. But then I remembered Grandma's words, never let anyone decide your worth. I decided to confront my parents. One evening when we sat down to dinner together, I gathered all my courage and spread the printed test results across the table. I know what the company is doing at the West facility, I said, my voice trembling but firm. I have data. I have evidence. If you don't stop the illegal dumping, I will report it. Dead silence. My father slowly lifted his gaze, his eyes sharp as blades. My mother pressed her lips tightly together. Only Caleb looked shaken, his wide eyes filled with shock. Finally, my father spoke, his voice low and cold. You don't understand what you're saying, Nate. There are things bigger than you realize. This family survives because of silence. For the first time, I didn't bow my head. Silence isn't family. Silence is complicity. From that moment, I knew I had stepped onto a path with no return. I began collecting everything. Duplicate data sets, photographs of the samples, meticulous logs of time and location. I stored them all on an encrypted drive just in case the worst happened. And combined with the inheritance my grandmother left me, I had become the one thorn in the Porter family they could never pull out. A few days before graduation, their tone changed completely. My mother started calling more often, no longer questioning my grades or pressing me about career plans. Instead, she asked what kind of flowers I wanted on the tables at my graduation dinner, what dishes I liked so the chef could prepare them. My father even sent me a text. Congratulations in advance. You've done something good. Reading those words sent a chill down my spine. My father had never once praised me in my life. This change didn't bring comfort. It only made me more suspicious. They said they would throw a grand party on the rooftop of the Four Seasons. Every glass wall would open to a sweeping view of the city. You deserve a celebration worthy of you, my mother said sweetly, her tone so sugary it felt fake. I forced a polite smile and replied, yes, thank you, Mom. But deep down, I knew nothing my parents did ever came without strings attached. In those final days, I buried myself in finishing my research files while also carefully preparing a plan to protect myself. I kept one copy of the environmental data at the university, another on my personal drive, and a third with my supervising professor, just in case I happened to disappear. One evening, I accidentally overheard a heated argument behind the door of my father's study. My mother's voice was full of worry. William, are you sure this is necessary? What if someone finds out? My father's tone was low and sharp. Don't you get it? He already has enough evidence. Add the inheritance on top of that, and he'll never depend on us again. He could bring the whole company down. My mother's voice trembled. But he's our son. My father cut her off. He's a threat. The FDA has already begun a quiet investigation. If Nate speaks, we lose everything. I held my breath, my heart pounding violently. Then my father's voice dropped lower, but still clear enough for me to hear. The plan is just to make him sick for a few days. Get him hospitalized. During that time, we'll take care of the paperwork, cover the records. If the worst happens, if he dies before the trust is released, the money reverts back to us. That's the law. I stood frozen behind the door, cold sweat breaking across my skin. My own parents were plotting to poison me. And it wasn't just about the $8 million. It was about silencing the truth about the West facility. In that instant, I wanted to storm in and scream. But another voice inside whispered, if they know you've heard, they'll find another way. Something worse. I stepped back, forced myself to return to the living room and pretend I hadn't heard a thing. That evening, Caleb sat beside me, chatting cheerfully about his summer internship at the company. Asked if after graduation, I plan to apply to an international environmental organization. I looked at his face, radiant and confident, completely unaware of our parents' scheme. It struck me then. Caleb hadn't been part of that conversation. He was completely separate from their plotting. To him, I was still just the distant older brother, never the enemy. Watching him laugh, my chest tightened. Part of me resented him for being adored, for receiving unconditional love. But another part wanted to protect him, to make sure he never became collateral in our parents' power games. I knew that in just a few days, everything would explode, and I had to be ready. The night of my graduation party finally arrived. As I stepped out of the glass elevator onto the rooftop, I was nearly overwhelmed by the extravagance. Golden ribbons of light wrapped around each column, banquet tables draped in pristine white linen, adorned with imported flowers, a jazz ensemble playing soft melodies that mixed with the delicate clinking of glasses. To outsiders, this was proof of love, a dazzling display from a powerful family honoring their son. To me, every flickering candle felt like a flame waiting to consume me. Most of the guests were familiar faces from the Texas business world. My father's partners, sharply dressed executives, high-powered attorneys who had served our family for years. Even a few reporters from local business magazines. Among the sea of strangers, only a handful of people truly belonged to me. My buddies, Jake and Mia, looking slightly out of place, hurried over and wrapped me in congratulations. I forced a smile, silently grateful that I wasn't completely alone. As I spoke with my friends, I could feel my parents' eyes fixed on me, never wavering for even a second. Their presence pressed on me like two hawks circling prey, watching every movement, every word that left my lips. Their smiles stayed in place, but the stiffness of their lips and the calculating glint in their eyes told a different story. I caught a glimpse of my father leaning in to whisper something to Gerald, the company's longtime attorney. Gerald nodded, then glanced at me with the sharp, appraising look of someone assessing an item about to go up for auction. A shiver ran through me. If he was here tonight, it wasn't just to celebrate my graduation. Caleb appeared at my side, smiling radiantly as always, lifted his glass and tapped me lightly on the shoulder. Since everyone keeps asking me about your plans after graduation, he laughed. Why are they so obsessed with that? Mom and Dad keep bringing it up over and over. I looked at my brother and saw the innocence in his eyes, mixed with a faint trace of unease. He still didn't understand the truth behind it all. I forced a smile. They probably just want to make sure I'll do the right thing for the family. Caleb frowned. But isn't this your moment? Why aren't they asking if you're happy? That simple question pierced me like a blade. I turned away, sipping my water to avoid answering. When I looked back, I caught my mother's stare fixed on me, her smile stiff as wax. She stood among a cluster of society women, her glass shimmering in hand. Yet her attention never wavered from my every move. I drew in a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Every sense was on high alert. I knew I was standing in the predator's arena, and I was the prey. The laughter and chatter faded into a distant hum, leaving only the pounding of my heartbeat in my chest. My mind flashed to the notebook filled with water sample data I had hidden away. As long as I was alive, that truth could still come to light. And maybe that was exactly why my parents had decided I had to be eliminated tonight. But I did not tremble. I had already overheard their scheme. I was ready. And I swore to myself I would not let them win. The party entered its most formal stage. Warm golden lights spread across the rooftop. The soft sound of live jazz drifted from the band. Guests waited for the moment to raise their glasses in honor of the family's celebrated graduate. I sat there in the suit Jake had helped me pick out, my heart uneasy from the moment the evening began. My parents hadn't taken their eyes off me. Every movement I made felt like it was under a microscope. My father suddenly picked up a bottle of sparkling cider. The servers poured for the guests, but when they reached our table, my father insisted on doing it himself. A nice personal touch, he announced with a smooth smile. For my graduate son. He filled my glass and set it in front of me. I watched my mother lean forward, pretending to adjust the napkin near my plate. But I caught it, the quick movement of her hand over my glass, the faint shimmer of powder dissolving into the golden liquid. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. The words I had overheard came rushing back, just enough to make him sick. Hospitalized for a few days, time to shift the assets. My throat went dry, but I kept my smile, calm, unshaken. I glanced around. My mother pretended to chat with the women beside her, though her eyes never left me. My father raised his glass, waiting for me to follow. In that tense instant, I leaned slightly and tapped Jake's hand beneath the table. He looked up and met my eyes filled with both a plea and resolve. My lips barely moved as I whispered, "Record this. Record everything." Jake gave the faintest nod. Quietly, he slid his phone from his pocket, placed it on his lap, and with one discreet touch, set the camera rolling toward the table. "To Nate!" my father declared, his voice booming across the rooftop. Guests echoed the cheer, their clapping filling the air. I lifted my glass. Caleb, sitting beside me, smiled brightly, his face glowing with pride. Not a trace of suspicion. He had never glimpsed the dark side of our parents. Never imagined they could harm their own child. My father's eyes flashed, urging me to drink. I drew in a steady breath, then turned suddenly to Caleb, my voice soft and warm. My dear brother, today isn't just my day. You've always been there encouraging me whenever I was struggling. I want to share this moment with you. I smiled and handed him my glass. The guests clapped approvingly, believing it was nothing more than a sweet gesture of brotherly affection. "Oh, Nate, you're amazing!" Caleb exclaimed, his voice brimming with emotion. He took the glass without a shred of doubt. I quickly lifted his glass, the clear, safe one, and brought it to my lips. In that instant, my parents went pale. The color drained completely from their faces. My mother stammered, half reaching out to stop it, but it was too late. In front of dozens of guests and the phones already recording, they couldn't do a thing. Caleb tilted his head back and drank in one long sip. "Delicious," he said with a carefree laugh, utterly unaware of what he had just swallowed. The music swelled again. The guests returned to their conversations. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw my parents standing frozen. They forced smiles, clapped along with the crowd, but their hands trembled. The family attorney bent low to whisper something, his own face betraying panic. I set my glass down gently on the table and smiled calmly. Beneath the table, I gripped Jake's hand tightly. The camera was still rolling, capturing the entire exchange, the glass switch, the flicker of terror in my parents' eyes. I lowered my head and whispered just loud enough for Jake to hear. "The evidence is sealed now. They'll have to play by my rules." The rooftop buzzed with life. Jazz floated through the night air. Glasses clinked, and laughter filled the space. I kept my face serene, though inside my heart pounded so hard I thought it might shatter my ribs. I had just done something so daring I could hardly believe it myself. I had passed the glass my father poured to Caleb, and now all I could do was wait and see what would unfold. The first 10 minutes passed without incident. Caleb laughed brightly, shaking hands with guests, even boasting that our family was preparing to entrust him with bigger responsibilities at the company. I stood off to the side quietly watching. Every time my parents' eyes flicked toward Caleb, I could see the tension behind their forced smiles, the tight press of their lips. They were afraid. I knew it. And then about 10 minutes later, the change began. Caleb, who was always flawlessly composed, suddenly placed a hand over his chest, his face drained of color. "Are you okay?" a friend asked as he swayed unsteadily. "I'm just a little dizzy," Caleb murmured, forcing a fragile smile. But within a minute, cold sweat poured down his skin. His makeup-free face turned ghostly pale. I held my breath, my heart clenched with a pang. No matter how bitter I felt toward him, seeing Caleb suffering like this still struck me with a stab of sorrow. But then the memories came rushing back. The times he had taken credit for things, the times my parents defended him and cast me aside. And tonight, the fact that our parents had meant this poison for me. "My heart is racing too fast," Caleb gasped, before collapsing suddenly onto the floor. Screams erupted across the party. Guests stumbled back in panic. Others shouted frantically for help. "Call 911!" someone yelled. "Get an ambulance now!" I rushed forward, kneeling beside Caleb. Strangely, I was calmer than anyone else. Amid the chaos, I leaned close to Jake and whispered, "Send the video now. Back it up to the cloud. Don't let it get lost." Jake nodded rapidly, his hands trembling but firm as he tapped on his phone, securing the evidence. The wail of ambulance sirens cut through the Austin night faster than I expected. Paramedics rushed onto the rooftop with a stretcher and emergency equipment. Caleb was laid down, his face ghostly pale, his eyes fluttering half shut. "He's struggling to breathe. Heart arrhythmia," one medic shouted. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately." I stepped forward, keeping close, my gaze steady, my voice clear and firm. "Wait, I have critical information. Tell the doctors this is very likely a toxin related to an experimental compound from Porter Pharmaceuticals. Project code R17. The substance is called cyclopentylamine derivative 47. The paramedics froze for a split second. One turned to me, startled by the certainty in my voice. "Are you sure?" I nodded sharply. "I interned in the company's lab. I know the signs." Without hesitation, the medic scribbled notes and relayed the message through his radio. I glanced at my parents. They stood frozen, their faces ashen. My mother stammered, her voice cracking. "Nate, what are you saying? Don't slander your own parents like this." I turned, my voice sharp as steel. "Slander! Everyone here saw it. Father is the one who chose that bottle. And soon the doctors will confirm everything. If there's truly nothing to hide, then what are you so afraid of?" The air went silent. A few guests began glancing at my parents with suspicion. The family attorney stood stiff beside them, sweat beading on his forehead. The ambulance sped away. Jake caught my arm, worry etched on his face. Are you sure you want to go? I can go with you. The police will be here any minute. That's exactly why I have to go, I replied, my eyes unwavering. If I'm not there, they'll twist the story, make me out to be the liar. I have to be the one to speak the truth first. At the emergency room, chaos reigned. Doctors and nurses swarmed around Caleb, inserting IV lines, attaching heart monitors. The screen showed erratic spikes, his heartbeat in complete disarray. One doctor frowned at the test results, signs of chemical poisoning, likely an industrial compound. I stepped in immediately. It could be R17, an experimental compound suspended, because it caused arrhythmia and respiratory failure. Porter Pharmaceuticals studied it 2 years ago. The doctors snapped up, startled. And how do you know this? I've been secretly investigating their lab for months. That's why the moment Caleb started sweating cold and his heartbeat went erratic, I recognized the symptoms instantly. This isn't random. It's the classic reaction to the compound. The doctor nodded sharply and gave the order to prepare the experimental antidote protocol. Just then, police arrived. 2 officers stepped in and immediately requested statements. There is suspicion the victim was poisoned. We need information. My father pushed forward, his voice harsh. This is a private family matter. My son only had a drop in blood pressure. There's no need for police interference. But the officer cut him off firmly. The doctors have confirmed signs of chemical poisoning. This is now a criminal matter. You and your wife will need to cooperate. Every eye in the emergency room shifted toward my parents. They tried to hold steady, but the tremor in their hands betrayed them completely. I leaned toward Jake and whispered, "It's begun. They won't escape this time." Caleb remained unconscious, but with the emergency antidote, his vitals slowly stabilized. The doctor turned to me, his voice unwavering. Your information saved his life. Without it, we would have lost critical minutes. I nodded silently. Inside, I felt both relief and bitterness. Caleb had been saved, but the truth about my parents was now out in the open. This was only the beginning. But at least tonight, the balance had shifted. The one who was meant to be the victim was now the one holding the truth and the evidence. While Caleb lay motionless in intensive care, I sat waiting in the stark white hospital corridor. My phone buzzed nonstop. Calls from the police, calls from lawyers, even reporters. News of Caleb's collapse and suspected poisoning at the Porter family's lavish graduation party had already spread through Austin like wildfire. Within just 24 hours, the FBI was officially involved. I knew the reason wasn't only the poisoning. It was the trail leading straight to the experimental compounds inside Porter Pharmaceuticals' labs. When the FBI and Austin police stormed Porter Pharmaceuticals' headquarters with an emergency search warrant, I wasn't surprised. Box after box of files, hard drives, and records were sealed and hauled away. It took only a few days for toxicology experts to confirm it. The compound found in Caleb's blood matched an experimental drug the FDA had already suspended due to suspected toxicity. What chilled me to the bone was that in every report the company had submitted to regulators, there wasn't a single mention of such dangerous side effects. Then came an anonymous email to the FBI from a scientist who had worked on the project. He wrote that they were forced to alter the data, made to hide the adverse reactions. He still had the original reports. The FBI traced the lead and uncovered a hidden archive on the company's internal servers. Troves of documents showing that top executives, including my own parents, had ordered staff to falsify numbers, erase lab animal deaths, and bury liver toxicity warnings. My hands shook as I flipped through the copied files. All the suspicions I had carried for so long were no longer theories. They were fact, but that wasn't all. The company's environmental division was exposed too. In a warehouse outside the city, investigators uncovered crates of untreated toxic chemicals buried directly in the ground. The shipping records were forged to deceive the EPA. I thought back to the polluted rivers where I had taken samples, and fury burned hot in my chest. The video Jake recorded at the party was also submitted to police. On it, the camera caught the moment my mother discreetly slipped something into the glass before my father handed it to me. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but the movement was unmistakable. Forensic testing confirmed that the glass contained traces of the same toxic experimental compound. Sitting in the interrogation room, my voice stayed calm but unyielding. My parents have always seen me as a thorn in their side. I refused to join the company. I refused to enable their corrupt deals. And that night, they didn't just try to ruin my reputation. They tried to end my life. The next day, the Austin American-Statesman ran a bold front-page headline. Pharmaceutical CEO and wife charged with conspiracy to murder son, fraud, and environmental crimes. Photos of Porter Pharmaceuticals' headquarters sealed with FBI tape flooded every news channel. CNN, the New York Times, every major outlet reported it. What began as a family tragedy had erupted into a national shockwave about corporate ethics and the moral decay of America's elite. Social media exploded. Thousands of comments called it the cruelest case of parental betrayal in a decade. A new hashtag spread like wildfire: Justice for Nate and Caleb. I read the posts one by one, my hands trembling, my eyes wet. 9 months later, at the federal courthouse in Austin, the trial officially began. My parents, dressed in dark suits, sat at the defendant's table, their faces cold, as if they still believed they held control. Their defense attorney raised his voice. My clients are being framed. This was nothing more than an accident. Nate fabricated this story to destroy his parents and seize their fortune. I sat there listening, my whole body cold and rigid. But the prosecution was ready. They presented the video, the toxicology results, the falsified documents and testimony from the company's own employees. A map of environmental contamination lit up the screen, sending murmurs rippling through the courtroom. Caleb, still frail and not fully recovered, stepped up to the witness stand. I gripped my hands tightly, watching his trembling figure. I never imagined my own parents would do this, Caleb said, his voice breaking. I trusted them. But now I know the truth. They poisoned me, and they meant it for Nate. My mother tried to speak from the defendant's table. It was all a misunderstanding. My son is mistaken. We would never harm our own child. But at that very moment, the prosecutor revealed the final blow. An email my father had sent to the research division. Eliminate all adverse reaction data. If not, this project is dead. In the end, after weeks of testimony and argument, the jury delivered its verdict. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, document forgery, gross violations of environmental law. The judge struck his gavel, his voice firm and resonant. The defendants are sentenced to long-term federal prison. All personal and corporate assets are hereby frozen. Porter Pharmaceuticals is placed under court supervision, pending dissolution. The courtroom erupted with the sound of cameras clicking, keyboards clattering, and hushed voices buzzing. I closed my eyes as a single tear slipped down my cheek. Not out of pity, but because at last, the truth had come to light. When the trial ended, the fallout was immediate and brutal. My father got 15 years federal. My mother got 12. No possibility of parole for either of them until they served at least 85% of their sentences. The judge made sure of that. Porter Pharmaceuticals was officially seized by the government. Assets frozen. Operations shut down. Over 2,000 employees lost their jobs, which I genuinely felt bad about. But the company had been poisoning communities for years. Sometimes the rot goes too deep to save. The financial damage was staggering. Between legal fees, fines, and civil settlements to the families affected by the environmental contamination, my parents' entire fortune was wiped out. The mansion I grew up in got seized and auctioned off, sold for $2.3 million to some tech executive from California. I drove by once just to see it. Didn't feel a thing. My grandmother's trust fund was released to me the week after the verdict. $8 million. I moved into the lakeside house she'd left me. Nothing fancy, just a wooden cabin with a porch facing Lake Travis. First night there, I sat outside with a cup of coffee and watched the sunset. Didn't check my phone once. First time in months, I actually felt like I could breathe. Caleb moved in with me after he got out of the hospital. The poisoning had done a number on his heart. Doctors said he'd need monitoring for at least a year, but he was alive, and something in him had changed. First week at the house, he came to me looking like he hadn't slept in days. I'm not finishing my business degree, he said. I'm applying to law school. Environmental law. I want to help people like the ones our company hurt. I didn't say anything, just nodded. That was enough. 3 months later, I used part of my inheritance to set up a foundation, named it after Grandma Eleanor. The fund provides medical assistance to families affected by the contamination, plus scholarships for students studying environmental science and public health. We've helped over 200 families so far. The extended family drama was predictable. Aunts and uncles who'd ignored me for years suddenly wanted to reconnect. Cousins I hadn't heard from since childhood started sending Facebook messages, all of them with the same energy. Concern for my parents, questions about the inheritance, hints about how families should stick together. I blocked every single one of them. 6 months after the sentencing, I got a letter from the federal prison where my mother was being held. Handwritten, 3 pages long, full of apologies and explanations and requests for forgiveness. She said she never meant to hurt me. Said my father pressured her into it. Said she prayed for me every day. I read it once. Then I burned it in the fireplace. A week later, another letter arrived. This one from my father. Different tone entirely. No apologies, just accusations. Said I had destroyed the family legacy. Said I was ungrateful for everything they'd given me. Said I would regret this for the rest of my life. I didn't bother reading past the first paragraph. Straight into the fire. The letters kept coming for about 2 months. Then they stopped. I assume they finally got the message. Last month, Caleb got his law school acceptance letter. Full scholarship to UT Austin. He's starting in the fall. Kid's actually excited about studying for once in his life. Wild how almost dying can change your priorities. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.